Okay, I got it recording.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
We are recording.
Okay.
There's Ted.
Hey, Ted. Okay, do we have the agenda up or do you pull that up?
I can get it up there.
Okay. Brandon, it's good to see you.
Do you see anything?
Yeah, but it's kind of small.
Alrighty, I can, no problem. Is that any better?
Yes, thank you. Okay, so I guess the first item is discuss next steps in
Well,
the ICI recommendations. Or you got something else? Go ahead.
yeah, I was gonna ask you if it's okay with you if we could do Pier City recycling programs first.
Sure.
Okay. I will pull up the,
And that's the handouts that you sent? Slides, I mean.
yes, that's the slides.
Okay.
If you all recall, we had subcommittee members all participate in kind of looking at the peer cities
Right.
recycling websites and everything. And there were four. And I think maybe Chicago isn't listed here on the agenda, but so Diane made a little side-by-side of some of the key things that were given to us on a document. You know, for example, I think Julie looked at Austin, Sarah Lynn looked at Boulder, and submitted a document. And then she's getting to the slide. That's what's waiting on. Diane, you were seeing presenter view, so it shows the next one.
We don't have a quorum yet, do we?
I don't think so.
I don't believe me.
I only see 3 other people. It's really hard to find everybody.
Diane, the presentation, I don't know if it really matters except for size, but we see the presenter view that shows the next slide.
Thank you. Well, let me swing this bad boy over here. How do I? Okay. Let's try this.
There we go.
I don't know how that works because looks exactly the same as last time. So let me see here. Okay.
So we'll skip the minutes. Okay, so there's the cities that each group or individual spent a little time looking at what they offered as far as what their website shows. And on the next slide, Diane created this side-by-side. So the top one's light and a little hard to read, but basically it says zero waste goals under Orlando, zero waste goals under Austin, and then zero waste ordinance under Boulder, just showing that they had kind of an all-encompassing zero waste initiatives going on in those cities. And then down below, just some requirements that they offered. This is focusing on their like ICI or business recycling. So Trash is required, recycling is optional. And then compost bins offered to single-family residents, which was interesting. And then Austin, require all properties to provide trash, recycling, and also organics. Chicago had recycling is required for all refuse collection customers. Boulder also requires trash and recycling. So just kind of this idea of what it was that they required the locations to actually have. And then the next one down is kind of some maybe additional requirements. Like Orlando actually had an enclosure requirement where the dumpsters that they used had to be enclosed. Austin had a pairing requirement with like even a specific distance, I believe, for trash and recycling. Boulder also had an enclosure requirement. All of them that had, Chicago didn't seem to have any mandates like this, I guess. But they all, the other ones all had some kind of phase-in approach. And so there's a little bit of more specific on how they did their phase-in approach for their requirements. And then Orlando didn't really show any thing about how they educate, I guess, but the other three had some information and instructions. So if you can see it, some of the words do get a little tiny, but basically Austin and Boulder annually, the tenants of each building would have to be refreshed on the education annually, and then new tenants, anytime there's new tenants. And I guess for Chicago, it was a little bit more vague, but they would develop and implement an ongoing education program. And then the last one was just, I think, Diane, didn't you say just kind of some extra little things that were added in? Orlando had a verification form. Austin specifically regulated the businesses and not the haulers. And they also had standardized signs and information that you could get from the website. Chicago hosts signs in and around collection containers, so specific for that. And then Boulder also had like a downloadable standardized sign and information. So, so really this was just kind of pulling out of the document that you all had created, just kind of outlining some of the key points that we noticed in that. And the next thing, kind of, some of this is a little bit of like, remember back when we did this, because some of this has been a long time ago. But one of the documents that Diane emailed to you right before the meeting was kind of a refresher on the board approved proposal for the ICI. It was the recommendation that was for ICI standards in signage and infrastructure is what it was kind of called. So, so if you all have that up on your own screen, that's fine, or whatever. But if you recall, it's again been a while, but we had written out some key design questions in that proposal. So that's what Diane is pulling up here. So, and I see Sarah Lynn just joined the call, and I think Matt has. So that's great. Hi. So who remembers this pre-pandemic document right here?
Sort of.
Yeah. Yes.
Well, what we've done as staff is gone through, because again, this proposal was already board approved for moving forward toward design, and in this, at the very beginning, it says right there beginning by answering these key design questions. So, so that's kind of what we wanted to go over today, is a way to answer those questions was to kind of draft something that is just very vague, but allows us to kind of have discussion and work with a document. So let us know if the method seems okay with you all. But the idea is in this document that we sent, again, you can look at it on your own, or Diane has it pulled up here, is for discussion only, kind of written in such a way like it's an ordinance. So I don't know if you want to go through it by looking at the design questions and then finding it in there, or we can just kind of look through, or if you all want to look through it on your own. Greg, do you have any opinions on how we look at this?
Now I'm
Sorry.
kind of looking. I'm looking at it and remembering as we're talking. So
Yeah.
Whoa, sorry.
And sorry for not sending all of this a lot sooner. We were down to the wire before this meeting trying to get some things going. And then Pete, I don't think he joined. He got called out onto a report of some kind of oil coming out of a business or something bad, environmentally bad. So, all right.
So-
Well,
I have a question
yes.
for Sandra, whom I interpret the software to say is on the call. Sandra?
Yes.
She
Yeah.
is? Maybe she's muted. At any rate, my thought is the next to the last question about soliciting and incorporating input from the stakeholders. I don't know that she would have an opinion, but if she did, I'd like to know what she thinks about when, not how, but when does she think it's important? And I may be conflating her affiliation in a way that doesn't even make sense.
Well, I will say this document on the left, that's kind of this discussion only draft, that's the only question that document doesn't really answer. But I believe it would make sense to include any stakeholders as soon as possible, as long as we're moving forward with planning and designing.
Actually, I agree with you. I'm sorry, I was on mute. Ask me your question in a little bit more detail.
Well, I think technically you represent the small cities, and I think of the small cities as having lots of apartment complexes, and my design assumption could be just plain off the mark, but I wondered if you had an opinion on what makes sense, and here's what I'm thinking. When we tried to poll the companies that allow you to come and do bulk disposal in your pickup truck, we got very little response and not particularly helpful input. And I assume that it's more likely that they are just too busy to deal with it than it is that they don't want to offer their opinion. And so part of me was wondering if folks like that wouldn't rather we get a ball in the air like this on the left, so they have something tangible to respond to, rather than just asking them open-ended questions. And I recognize that I often advocate for open-ended questions, but I'm questioning if that's applicable here.
No, I agree with what you're saying, because I think one of the things we're going to find out is that, first of all the cities are absolutely not the same. They're all unique. And we're also, I think, going to find out that the answer to your question is not going to be anywhere near a one size fits all. And so I agree with the fact that the sooner you get input, I think the better you can draft something that will make sense in the future.
Mm-hmm.
Because if we're looking at, for example, at a city that has a lot of large apartments, you're looking at something very different from a city that has very small apartments. And then I think the other thing that needs to get, how do you filter condos into here? Are they an apartment? I know it says dwelling units, but I'm not sure that there's always the same end result.
That's a good question. We deal with
Very
that
good
with our
question.
recycling carts already.
Right.
Oh, okay. How does it affect that?
They, I don't know. Policy is a little vague to me on that. They're not considered the under the whole 8 units or fewer kind of thing. Like we will service them, but at the same time, we have a hard time giving them a cart per unit, recycling cart that is, and sometimes it's space for them, and there's lots of different things with that. So I totally am with you, Sandra, on the condos that we
No, I
might
appreciate,
define that
I
better.
appreciate what you just said
And-
because my granddaughter for a couple of years lived in a place that probably is like what's in your mind right now. And that is a whole different ball game from something that's, you know, a big, huge apartment building.
Mhm.
I think just in practice, I think, you know, some condos are set up more like a homeowners association and they provide, you know, a dumpster service. Because my brother lives in a condo off Bardstown Road and they have a dumpster, but then the condo literally next door to them doesn't have access to the alley and they have a bunch of carts that are stuck on the side of the building and somebody puts them out, all of them out on the curb weekly. So I think it's not just like saying this one has 5 units, that one has 8 units. It's more of how they were built and how they were set up to if they're, you know, have a dumpster, have space for a dumpster, or, you know, have individual carts.
Yeah.
Right. And it's usually decided by their management associations, and that changes every year sometimes, right?
Mhm.
Once
Well, and the older ones don't have management associations. I mean, it really, there's a whole panoply of potential
Right.
issues out there.
Well, to not get too hung up on our anomaly of condos, we can kind of look at it a little bit more generally, I guess. And in the key design questions, for example, who would be accountable for actions outlined in the standards is answered just by defining a responsible party. So in this example, it's the tenant or leasee on a premise. And you all can, you know, read all of that. And then which occupancy types, those are also listed. And then this kind of goes in conjunction with the question down below that says, will we use a phase-in schedule to allow time for these new requirements? And based on what we saw in those peer cities, and I think the general consensus would probably be yes, a phase-in approach would be a good way to go. So this is just an example of how it could happen if it were done by size. And Diane, when you scroll, I think because this first part is focused on the multifamily, but then it moves on to like office and medical or hotels, things like that. So it's kind of similar on this one. It's similar based on size here, but it's divided into those different types of places. And then
I want to make a comment about the very first point before we go any further, please,
sure.
about the responsible party. And it shows up again at the bottom of the screen now. I just had this conversation with my partner last night, and I thought he said the lessor is the entity or the person that owns the building, and the lessee is the one who rents it or leases it. If that's correct, we don't really mean the tenant or the lessee. Don't we mean the landlord or the lessor?
Well, isn't the lessee the landlord then?
I think the
No.
lessee is the
No.
person who's occupying the property as a,
Lessee, yeah.
what's
okay.
Sandra say? She's an attorney.
Yeah, you're
No,
you're
but
correct.
Sarah Lynn's
Sarah.
correct.
Okay.
So it should say tenant or leaseor.
Well, no, I
No,
think it should
because the
say
tenant
landlord
is
or
the
lessor.
leasee. Right.
Sorry,
Okay.
Sandra, go ahead.
No, what you said is true. Tenant and leasee are similar, and that isn't what you want, right?
Correct. You want to have landlord, property owner, or something like that, and lessor.
Well, that's part of this discussion, is to make sure that we, if we were to present or allow stakeholders to look at something, you know, we want it to be a document that, even if it's not the official way to go, we want it to be something that makes sense to them.
Right.
So that's fine. We will, Diane and I will take notes on all of this. And of course, we're recording, so we can make some adjustments.
Do we not have a county attorney assigned to us to help with this sort of thing, like the difference between condos and apartments as well?
Yes, I think from our conversation with Pete this week, we do want to have our county attorney involved in this process, but I think if for our purposes of discussion, it's probably better to look at it and get it to a place where we know what we're trying to say before
I
the
agree.
attorney gets a hold of it and makes the
That's
words.
Can I ask,
Wouldn't
did
it be
anybody
easier?
find, in these other peer cities we looked at, does anybody have these things already defined that we could borrow their language?
It's a good question.
Yeah, we can look at any of the ordinances. Sometimes when you look at the website, you know, some of these cities have some really great websites, and they're already super clear for residents or property owners to read. Sometimes it's good to pull out find their actual ordinance words. So yeah, we've looked at some of those and tried to kind of compile to create this draft, but again, it can totally be changed to what we want. This is just kind of a starting point. So we
One
have
of the
something.
other things I think that might be considered is, instead of trying to bite off the entire world, that instead of focusing on all different occupancy types, we just start with one, because the issues regarding multifamily residential are not the same as the issues regarding the next two. And we may get very different feedback.
I agree.
And okay.
And there's also a second place in that first item where we have the incorrect terminology.
So scroll back up, Diane. What did you highlight at the top? So in parentheses, it says,
Landlord,
Anyway.
right?
zoom in a little.
But towards the end, there's the last clause has tenant or lessee in it again. I just wanted to make sure that got caught.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm not super familiar with the lessee, lessor terms like you were talking about the conversation you had, Sarah Lynn. So
Usually the OR is the doer and the EE is the receiver.
That
Okay.
makes sense. That's a good tip.
Think about employee and employer. Thank you.
Yeah,
Exactly.
Okay. So so in the occupancy types, yes, we've listed 3, and that's also a good point, Sandra, to possibly, you know, focus on one at a time, or so scroll on down, Diane. What else is under there?
Okay.
Okay, so then there's containers, and, you know, like we kind of showed in the Pier City chart, some are much more specific than others, and we, of course, can do whatever we think is useful. We can ask for stakeholder discussion in that. I think this was the part that would where we wrote, how will we define access to adequate recycling containers, so we just would have to decide how that is done. Some get real specific on distance and size, but this just draft starting point here. Diane, can you scroll up a little bit? I lost containers.
Oh, I'm sorry. Can you find it?
Okay, so the tenant or lessee or lessor, whichever we're trying to say, shall provide enough containers to make it convenient for the occupants to dispose of recycling materials. It's recommended that each solid waste garbage container be paired or in the same area with a recycling container. Nothing in this article requires containers to be provided by the tenant or lessee for the inside of the individual living quarters. So I guess if we're talking about apartments, we're not necessarily saying that you have to give your tenant containers for the inside. Okay, keep scrolling, Diane.
This way?
If I were a member of a regulated body, that word convenient would cause me to chuckle because it's
Okay.
a pretty useless, ill-defined word. It's a matter of opinion. And so I think we need to say something more specific and more helpful.
Okay, and that's like where I think what Julie showed in her document from Austin, it had some diagrams for like it had to be 25 feet or less distance or something. So, and again, that can be defined however we would want, but that's an example. That's a good point.
But in Louisville, if you start defining feet, I think you're going to get into problems where the cities are so crammed in some places and so spread out in others. So.
Mm-hmm.
You know, one thing I think we need to say to ourselves and to the regulated body is we're going to set some standards here, but we have an appeal process whereby you can request a variance because we can't make a cookie cutter rule for every situation and just keep reminding people this is what we think is best. But if it doesn't work for you, let us know. That's what the Boulder, Colorado program does. And they seem to think it helps and works. And besides that, it's probably legally required that we have some sort of an appeal process for when things don't work right.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Otherwise, we're going to have a lot more pushback, I think.
The other part of that container section talks about requiring capacity, however much capacity they need. So I don't know if that would need to get any more specific, but.
Yeah, I mean, I would use like a health department rule that says all the trash has to fit into the container and the lid should be able to be shut with nothing spilling out. A practical premise sanitation kind of an approach.
Well, how do we do that with garbage cans? In other words, if I have a 6 occupancy unit, am I required to have a minimum number of square feet, volume,
Cubic feet?
cubic feet? I'm sorry, right? Or what's the, how do we, don't we want to do something similar?
I don't know that there's a rule.
So we're saying the city, a person could have a 10-unit apartment complex, give all the people one trash can and be in compliance?
Well, I mean, I
Not
don't
if
think
the
we have
options
hard and
are-
fast rules, but the reality of it is if you've chronically got trash spilling out onto the ground, the health department's going to pop you at some point.
Right. Well, then if we don't have hard, fast rules for garbage, why don't we make the same, not hard, fast rules for recycling containers, but with the same caveat that if stuff is overflowing, they got to get more.
Like I say, I think we need to take a premise sanitation, which is the term you use in public health, take a premise sanitation approach to this. It's plain English and, it's intuitively practical.
I guess all I'm saying is we're the solid waste group, that we should just sort of copy some of the solid waste rules to the recycling rules is my.
If they exist, I'm hip, but I'm not convinced they exist on this one.
Okay.
Well, not being able to put garbage or recycling on the ground is.
Right. I mean, isn't
True.
that adequate? That if that's what we do with garbage, so they have to buy another can if it's chronically overflowing, then why can't we just say the same for recycling?
I mean, I think it is.
They have to provide a minimum.
Greg, I think that is what I'm saying.
Okay. All right. Well, but I worry about if we start getting into 25 feet or this and that numbers, it's just going to get attacked.
Well, and the other part of it is there are even somewhere that's not the issue. I can think of was recently where they've got, remember those chutes they had? in the old fashioned buildings. They have
Uh-huh.
that in the building I was just in.
Yeah,
Wow.
there's some
And do they
old
still
buildings
use
still have that.
Yeah, they do. In fact, it's not even that old building.
Wow.
And I remember one that the chute went to a incinerator.
Yeah.
So people would throw their stuff down. Sometimes sparks would come flying up to the.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, on the key design questions, I skipped down on one that, one in the middle says, how will we inform and instruct occupants? And we made a note when we were discussing, as staff, that the we there implies us, but really, based on what we saw in some of the other city feedback or peer city results, was that it's not so much we as requiring an amount of education from the leaseor, whatever the term is, lessor. So,
But
So
I
that
thought
was-
we also said we were going to design it so that they didn't have to
Yes.
reinvent the wheel and even have a space for them to add a logo if they wanted.
yes, and that is, yes, that is true. But I think in the requirement for an ordinance would be more applicable. I mean, we can make it a requirement for us as a district as well in an ordinance if we choose, but I think for the purposes of this ordinance, it was more that, you know, if you own a big building and you have a new tenant coming in, that you have to tell them as a property owner, you have to tell them the rules and what is expected of you as far as recycling goes.
Well, what if we, as it currently is, assisted the property owner in the education?
Absolutely. Absolutely, we would. And that would be a goal, especially speaking from education side. You know, we would want a substantial website and downloadable materials like some of the other cities have. So, you know, not only can they just read it right there, but they can use our designs to have their signs printed or stickers printed or whatever it is that they needed.
Mhm.
And then on down, how will we define and keep current the list of divertible materials? I guess that was addressed in this section. Diane, back
The
up.
other
I
side.
think you're
Right
skipping
side.
it.
Did it? Oh,
Why is it different than the rest of the city?
It's not.
It's not different.
So this, are you speaking of right under A1 in this?
Yeah. Well, I was just listening to you verbally reference how do we define what they have to collect? And my thought is, isn't it already done?
Yes, and that is the key question there. I mean, key design question. That was something we were going to, or as a committee at some point, we wrote that. And I think it was, I didn't finish the question in context with the changing markets and recycling goals. So
But
I think there may have been
isn't that
concern.
something that doesn't, I mean, this has got, in a way, using a cliche, the kitchen sink in here, and yet it's about signage. And I'm thinking that that it needs to stay on that and not incorporate other things where in the event you made a change in what could be recycled, you'd have to change 3 or 4 ordinances. I mean, I don't see value in that.
See why we have her here.
Mhm. So
I
in our,
think- Oh, I'm sorry.
go ahead, Diane.
Sandra, they do have, most of them do have a clause in those 4 that says that it can be changed at the district or the manager or whoever. They can change the list so long as they notify people within the week or within the month.
Okay, but if we're talking about signage, I don't think the clause belongs here. I think the clause belongs in something that's much broader.
She's right.
Thank you, Sarah Lynn.
So, okay, let's, on this document on the left, on-site recycling material diversion services required under this article. And number one, that is a copy of what is in our ordinance currently that waste haulers are required to collect.
Point
That's
taken. but you know
actually
what?
my point.
Right. But the thing of it is, Sandra's right. You don't want to have to do all this. If we've already done it somewhere else, so be it. But I don't want to repeat that mistake. And more importantly, if you write it in the terms of the same as the rest of the city, there's less for people to complain about. It's not like we're picking on them, which some people will think we are.
So you're saying that like A1 could just refer to where that is in the rest of our ordinance?
Sure.
I don't think it needs to be there at all.
Okay.
Because
I-
if it's a diversion requirement, I think that instead of a separate section, you could have a sentence or something in the beginning of this whole thing that would do what you've just said. But making a separate section, I don't see a value to that.
This is Pete. Apologize for being late. I have a question, and I know I've just popped into this, so my apologies if I'm not getting and understanding what's at stake here. I think that the reason that was there is not necessarily it's for the people that this would impact. The other place that it's mentioned is where there is haulers, in the haulers ordinance, that's what they have to accept. So are you saying that we don't really need it in both places? The haulers automatically know that. So why have it here? Is
Do
that,
we not have an overall ordinance that deals with, going back to Sarah Lynn, the entire program, the entire city? I mean, we keep making things go into little batches, and I think that we run the risk in the future of having those things conflicting with one another, which could cause us not to be very successful at getting our goals accomplished.
no, I don't disagree with that. I think that, at least from my standpoint, what we're trying to do here is get something that is, it's not necessarily an ordinance as much as the idea. And once we make sure that we're covering everything, we can kind of, and where this would probably go would be in chapter 51, which also has the waste haulers in that. So point taken, it would be part of the ordinance that covers everything else recycling. I think that's where this would go. And when you start to add it into that, that's when the county attorneys come in and start to say, well, you got it here, you don't need it there. And doing all the nuances of ordinance writing.
Is there a compromise where we could say something like, because I think the what is important, and define the what, and I don't mean to say legally defined, but as the same container and paper products as single-family homes or something like that, so that when we send this out to the regulated body, they see that they're not being picked on.
We might even think about doing that another way and having all of the signage for everything be the same.
I would agree with that. I think that the recycling facilities have made that abundantly clear, and the recycling partnership has made that abundantly clear that signage across the county that is all the same lessens confusion.
Yep.
So I'd like to get it going. So don't we just want to say something like collect at a minimum, and then whatever we want to say about whatever is done, is defined for the residential areas, and move on, right? We're talking about just changing A1.
Yeah,
Right.
we can, I think we understand the point here. And I think that this is a starting point, but once we got to where we was putting this actually into an ordinance form, or into an existing ordinance,
Right.
we would match this up with saying that would follow with whatever section under residential recycling. And we can get those nuances that we're talking about, that we're not expecting anybody to do anything more than anybody else.
Good.
But if this is going to go out to people, then we want to do that before it goes out. So that's all we're saying.
Yeah.
Well, I'm going to say this. We need to be careful how far we go before we officially have stakeholders. Because we definitely want them to be part of the process. If we go ahead and put this into ordinance form, then they're going to wonder, well, how far have you, why wasn't we discussed before you guys put it in ordinance form? So just that caveat.
We agree with you.
Yeah,
That,
no, I
that,
wouldn't
is,
say
that
put it in
wasn't
or-
our concern.
Right, not to put it in ordinance form, but if this document's going to go out, then we want this document to not make it look like we're adding stuff or being too specific. That's all.
I mean,
Understood.
is the page on the left going to be under the heading of proposal on the page on the right? So people can see it's not a draft ordinance?
What do we have it the title of right now? I'm not even sure.
But it says it's. I just lost it.
It says it's a recycling ordinance.
Yeah, recycling
Maybe-
ordinance.
Yeah.
Yeah, we need to take those words out.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing, Pete, right before you came, we were talking about the fact that this is very global. It's dealing with multifamily housing, it's dealing with commercial, it's dealing with offices. And we really think that in order to be effective, especially with stakeholders, we need to take one step at a time, because we don't think that we're going to necessarily get the same input from all of those different kinds of places. Even if they are recycling the same thing, signage may be a different issue for each of them.
I can see that. I can see that. I
Yeah,
think that comes down to strategy in trying to implement something. You know, I
yeah,
think
and Pete, this
from my
is,
perspective,
this,
go ahead. I
sorry, Pete,
apologize.
go ahead. Oh, no, go ahead, I'm sorry. I heard a pause and.
Yeah, that's my slow thought process going on. No, this was really kind of like an idea of what we would be doing, not necessarily the form that it would be done. We wanted to strike a conversation of something that came from the proposal that the 109 board had already approved, and we're trying to make sure that we're covering everything that was in this ICI sector, which is ICI is a big sector, and multifamily kind of fits into that as a commercial thing if it's an apartment complex. I know it's a little bit more deep than that, but I think that once we get the ideas on this paper, then it's much easier for us to look at it and say that we can be consistent, we're not missing something. And then when it comes to actually putting it out and implementing or bringing in stakeholders, we can take it apart and do it that way. But we're not going to miss by just focusing on multifamily and then suddenly figure it out that, well, that's going to be a whole lot different if we try it in the commercial sector, which is a different, a business sector. So I can see just for the exercise of doing it all together, but implementing it separately, because we need continuity between the sectors. Does that make any sense?
Sort of, but are you saying you do want us to use a wide angle lens on this document, or you want us to go ahead and focus?
I think we take a wide angle look at it first so that we're covering everything. And, my apologies for being late, and I might be throwing a wrench into the whole conversation. But that's kind of my thoughts on the process. If you guys tell me I'm way out of line or totally off the train of thought, please tell me, and I'll just be quiet and listen for a while.
No, I think our concern was at the point in time where we get stakeholder feedback,
Right.
we need to focus on what their particular issues are, which is not quite the same as what you're saying.
Yeah. So
I'm going to throw, go ahead.
one thing that I'm convinced is going to help right now is to get that title off of there
Yes.
and give it a more working document, thought processy kind of a title. But I think that we have got to compartmentalize these documents for the audience if we really want them to give us feedback, because if they have to go through and figure out which sections apply to them, they're going to recycle the document at best,
That's a good point. It's a good
And
point.
the other thought I have that is parroting Sandra is if we could do one section, one sector, and feel like we've accomplished something, it's going to be a whole lot easier for us to metamorphosize it into the next, because we've done one.
Understood.
And Pete, I'm sorry, this is Andy with Waste Management. What I was going to jump in and say a couple minutes ago was just when you were talking about stakeholder issues, there are things that I'm sure, when we're talking about things that will increase diversion rate and signage, I think everybody is going to be in full agreement that having the same signage will be beneficial. I think where, one of the things that industry is going to be concerned about is how that would potentially interfere with branding.
Yeah.
But I'm sure that there are ways that we can make sure, whether it's just saying, recycle containers have to have a different colored lid, or, mandating something like that, or language on them that says recycle only, as opposed to saying the entire container has to be a certain color. I know that sounds like it's something that shouldn't matter at all. But it does for us, not just for, when I say branding, not just for the reason of somebody knowing it's a waste management container, but the guy that needs to know it's a waste management container is our driver, more than anything else. And where one city or one route changes. I'm sorry?
I don't think we were proposing to require a standard container color because, companies have brand standards.
Yeah.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure that was something that was in the original recommendation from the study. I just wanted to make sure that was at least considered. So.
Yeah, I think it's more symbols as much as anything, and any signage that we create would be a something that is customizable to the individual company's brand, where they can maybe change the colors, as long as they have the same basic format or something. But we have something in here that we've written into this discussion document that you'll see later on. I'm sure we haven't.
Sure, and I'm sorry, I'm on the phone, so I couldn't see what's on the screen. So sorry about that.
Okay, I'm going to sit back and be quiet for a while.
I'm going to make a quick recommendation. It's 4:10. We're supposed to only meet till 4:15. I think we have a quorum. Should we go back and quickly approve the minutes? And I think there's a reason for looking at the minutes right now. It sort of will get us back to what we talked about last time. Is that okay?
You're the chair.
Yeah. Okay. So I recommend everybody, if you haven't already, which hopefully you have, but please look at the minutes and make any changes that you feel necessary or approve. Because what I'm getting at is, and you could be doing that while I'm talking about the section that says recovery self-haul waste containers. We talked about already bringing in people and giving 15-minute presentations on what they can or cannot do. So we were sort of going down that route last meeting, I thought.
The self-haul presentations are being done at the full committee level.
Okay.
We'll have our first two today.
Okay.
Karen, did you say that the presentations would be done at the full committee meeting, not the subcommittee meeting?
Yes, that was stated at the meeting. I don't know if it's actually in the minutes, but I remember clarifying which meeting we wanted those to be done in. And it was said that the full committee. So so that's on the agenda. 2 of them for this month in just a few minutes, and 2 more in the November meeting.
Okay, got it.
Yes, thank you. I didn't see that when I was reading.
That's great.
Does anybody have any changes to the minutes? Questions? The only thing I would have is a question: did we identify who 50228 .52 is?
I think that's the fella from the landfill, isn't it? From Waste
No,
Management.
he's on a different number today.
I think that was me. That was
Oh,
Brandon.
Brand. Yes, that's right.
502-515652.
Yeah. So my recommendation would be to change that to Brandon Tone.
Okay,
Okay.
I could do that now. You want me to do it now?
Either way, whatever. I'll just,
Okay.
when you send it to me, I'll make sure it's on there. In the interest of time, I'd say let's not. And so if there's any other discussion besides the one change the phone number to a name, do I have a motion to approve the minutes?
I'll motion to approve the minutes pending the change to Brandon Code's identification.
Okay. Do I hear a second?
Second.
All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Say aye. Any opposed? Hearing none, the minutes are approved. Okay. Just want to get that out of the way before we move on.
Good.
So now, let's go back to what we were talking about, I guess. What, if we decide what we want to change the recycling ordinance title to?
I mean, I think it's got to have the word proposed or draft or something like that in the
Well,
title.
and also maybe not called an ordinance, I thought is what we,
Well, I mean, it is gonna, I mean, there's no sense in hiding it. Because I think when you, if you appear to be hiding it, you generate distrust. I'd rather them be pissed off than distrustful.
Well, I'm not sure I agree because an ordinance is a law.
Yeah.
And we may find as we go through some of this that it doesn't need to be a law. I can think of standards, if I spent some time, that we might want to enact that don't have to be enacted by a law. Because I think it depends on, when we talk about the law, what we're talking about is everybody who it applies to. And we may find as we go through some of this that it's a little more complex than that. I don't think we need the word ordinance right now. I really don't.
How about proposed recycling requirements?
That's fine. That's fine.
yeah. So is everybody okay with that? Proposed recycling requirements for discussion only?
Okay, but instead of just recycling requirements, it's about signage, correct?
Well, I think it's about a lot more than signage,
Yeah.
really.
Yeah, I thought it was more than that.
Because I mean, signage doesn't matter if you're not going to be doing something new and
I
different.
thought it was containers and signage and how to get them back and forth and all kinds of stuff.
Yeah.
Is that the adequate infrastructure in our standards thing on the proposal?
Yeah, I was gonna say we could mimic that phrase of signage and adequate infrastructure standards. Seems that would cover it all.
Right. It's 4:15. What do we want to finish on?
How much more is there?
I lost the agenda.
A lot.
We're not get that done tonight.
Oh, all right.
Can you guys repeat to me again what you want written on there?
For the title?
Yes.
Well, I think what you've got's good enough for working purposes right now, because, it'd be different if we got through this whole thing and it was gonna go somewhere else tomorrow, but it's not. We've got to
No.
do a lot more work.
No.
So would you like us as staff to look at what we have and the discussion that we had during this meeting, go ahead and kind of make some of those edits as best we can and just bring it to the next meeting?
Yeah, and I think that we ought to make some reference in the heading about this being for multifamily rental or something to distinguish it. Just so
So
every
yes.
time we look at it, we're reminded it's narrow.
So the idea is for us to focus on multifamily first.
Well, I thought we were responding to your idea, but sure. I just think we've got to focus. If we try to cover everything, we'll never get it done. We don't meet often enough. And in fact, I even see some merit in maybe some of us just trying to work on this and expedite it a little bit, but it's because I think it helps when more than one of us is discussing it, but I also think it's too hard to show people what we're thinking without just having a meeting.
Well,
we
in
had-
fact, go ahead.
I was going to say we can work on what was discussed in this meeting and email it to the subcommittee members, and then maybe before the next meeting, there may be some email discussion that could be had.
That's exactly what I was going to suggest. So thank you for saying it first. Yeah, if we could get it out at least like a week early, like I didn't have time to read stuff before the meeting today. I was out. But if we can get it out, let's say about a week or so beforehand, and you could even put some notes on it, like, here's what was recommended at the meeting, or here's what, and then we could send some emails back to you guys. And then at the meeting, I'm okay with having, Sarah Lynn said this, or Matt said this, or Adam said this, and, recommends or whatever. And we can quickly look at them and say, this sounds like the best wording, or this doesn't, and take this out or add this.
If we just use the word review function, we can put our comments and our thoughts, and it should label whose ideas they were.
Mm-hmm.
Is there a common document that you're saying to do that too?
Yeah, if they clean this up based on today's discussion and send it out to everybody, anybody who opens it in Word and clicks on review and track changes, every comment or proposed change they want to make, it'll be labeled whose idea it was.
Not everybody has Word.
No?
No.
Okay.
I thought you had to send it back to each one individual. I didn't. You're implying there's a master copy type thing out there. I didn't.
Would anybody be opposed to like a Google Doc or something that would be more like a link that
Universal?
everybody can change things?
I don't know, we found in something that more people had Word than could use Google Docs.
Yeah, because I don't know how. I mean, if somebody has pages, I think they can quickly convert it to Word, can't they?
Yeah, I think so.
If somebody that doesn't have the capabilities wants to make an edit, they can always email the staff,
Right.
and the staff can insert that.
Good.
Excellent idea. Thank you. Okay.
Good.
All right, 4:20. I think we want a little break between our
Yep.
actual advisory committee meeting. So
Plumbing break.
any other issues somebody wants to bring up now?
Hey, Greg, this is Brian.
Yes.
If I have a concern about sharing that type of information back before, maybe we need additional meetings, additional subcommittee meetings. Would people be in favor of that?
Meaning sooner than a month, right?
Yeah, sure. Or every other week.
I don't need more meetings, but I'm willing to do it to get this thing off the dime.
Yeah.
Well, I'm just bringing that up as a suggestion because I think it's helpful if you've got the whole subcommittee involved, or at least a quorum, right? We have to have a quorum at the meeting. I think we should have a quorum in between.
Well, but I thought we weren't deciding anything. I thought we were just making suggestions that would be decided at the next meeting then.
that everybody can see.
All right. I understand what you're saying, but I didn't think we were proposing that. In other words, I don't think any subcommittee meeting or any emailing would make a decision. It would just be adding suggestions and or clarifying, and then we get together as a group with the quorum and look at those suggestions and make the changes. That's what I
Yeah.
think.
That's what I'm proposing.
Yeah, I think adding comments through the Word document and just taking some time to work through that would be, efficient and productive. But if I think meeting in between meetings would also be possible. I'm not sure there'd be a possibility of reaching a quorum, but if it were to be like a subcommittee just meeting
Right.
and
I'm
not doing
worried
any
about getting quorum.
official
Yeah, I'm worried about getting
recommendations,
quorum.
but just working through the work and laying it all out. I think that could be useful.
Brian, are you okay with that, or?
Well, I guess we'd have to see how that process goes. I guess I'm thinking more, responsibilities and making sure that we have, I don't know that any other, committee inside of Metro or other places is doing that now, are they? Do we know, Karen or Pete or anybody? To me, it's like having meetings in between meetings.
And Brian is right in the fact that this is a public meeting and it's got to be recorded, got to have minutes and so on and so forth. And we can't take action without a quorum. If you're going to have a meeting with someone on this other person on this committee, you can do so. But we cannot do business without a quorum. If Brian wants to call and talk to Greg about it, that's fine. But where we get into trouble is if we have four of us talking about something, trying to stay under a quorum. That's not being an open meeting. That's trying to get around it. I don't think anybody's suggesting that.
No.
But we also have the appearance of something like that. That's
But
not
we're
necessarily.
not making decisions. All we're doing is those of us who are picky about details, we're volunteering, I think, to try to help the group by going through it in a very transparent, labeled way. We're not changing anything. We're just making comments to kind of help the group along. And,
I'm okay with that. If everybody else is agreed to it, but we'll watch the open meeting stuff. If it starts to get somebody has some concerns, we'll take a look at it.
All right, I'm kind of lost where we are in a consensus, so I don't know.
because we don't have one.
Yeah.
All right, here's a proposal. Staff cleans up based upon what we've discussed today, sends it out to everybody. At minimum, everybody takes a look at it. Anybody who wants to insert comments using the track changes function so that everybody can see who said what, does so. Except
Or
I now
sends their comments to staff where they make the change and list who asked for the change.
Yeah, that's just a pain in the ass, though. I'm not volunteering to do that. But I also see that if we don't do something like Google Docs, we're going to have multiple editions, and that's not practical. So never mind.
All I said was the staff would make the change because the person doesn't have the capability of Word, and they would put that person's name. So
Yeah,
I thought I was.
Let's try it and see how it works.
Yeah.
Let's try it and see how it works.
okay.
Right. All right.
So I can go pee now.
Yeah. Somebody make a motion to adjourn.
I move we adjourn. See y'all in a minute.
Anybody second? I guess.
Joey
second.
Don, say second. Hurry up. Okay.
Yeah.
I'll second, Greg.
Thank you. Meeting
All those
adjourned.
in favor?
Brian, I need to go.
All right.
See y'all in 4
Bye,
minutes.
everybody.
Meeting adjourned with no opposition. Okay.
Thank you.